As most of you no doubt remember, I think it's going on 3 weeks now that we began a study in this part of the chapter as far as dealing with the idea of women staying silent in the assembly worship. We discussed some of that. We brought up a couple of questions. There was a little bit of discussion. And my plans for this week, or a couple of weeks ago originally, was to go over some of those issues and kind of promote some discussion and kind of hash some of these different scenarios out. I appreciate Rodney filling in for me a couple of weeks ago. I appreciate him doing that on short notice. I know that's not an easy thing to do, and I appreciate him being willing to do that. Like we said, Lord willing, we will finish this chapter this morning. This is the last Sunday in the quarter, and so Rodney will be taking over when our next class time, which I believe, are we still having a guest speaker next week? So, yeah, so it won't be next week. It'll be sometime after that, and so Rodney will be taking over and kind of continuing. He started in chapter 15 when he subbed for me, and so he will be continuing there in that chapter. And so since it's been a little bit since we've discussed this, what I'd like to do, I want to read the last 14 verses of chapter 14 and then kind of do a very brief overview of some of the things that we discussed the last time, and then we'll get into some of those issues that we were dealing with there at the end of the class a few weeks ago. And so if you'll turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, we're going to read verse 26 through 40. I thought it was important for us to kind of set the stage here, get the context, because some of the things that we are going to discuss probably will go back up into some of these previous verses so that we can get the context of what Paul is speaking about and some of those things. So I thought we'd go ahead and just read those last 16 verses. So 1 Corinthians chapter, or 14 verses. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, beginning with verse 26. It says, "How is it, brethren, whenever you come together, each of you has a psalm, has a teaching, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification. If anyone speaks in a tongue, let there be 2 or at most 3, each in turn, and let one interpret. But if there is no interpreter, let him keep silent in church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others judge. But if anything is revealed to another who sits by, let the first keep silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, that all may learn and all may be encouraged. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for the women to speak in church. Or did the word of God come originally from you, or was it you only that it reached? If anyone thinks himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things which I write to you are the commandments of the Lord. But if anyone is ignorant, let him be ignorant. Therefore, brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy, and do not forbid to speak with tongues. Let all things be done decently and in order." And of course, that last phrase there, that last verse, let all things be done decently and in order, this is really what we're going after. We want things to be done decently, and decently is, God kind of establishes what's decent and in order. So they need to be decent and in order. And so that's what we're trying to, the conclusion we're trying to reach with all of these things. And so the question that we're looking at this morning is the idea of letting your women keep silent. And we see the basis for this. We're still having problems with this clicker. Comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 34 and 35. We read that verse just a minute ago. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church. And then we looked at last time 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 and 12, it says, let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. And so we ask the question, well, what does this require? What do these passages require? Well, first of all, we would say it requires for the women to keep silent. Let the women keep silent. And then it goes even as far as to say, not even ask questions. So it's not even permitted for women to ask questions within the worship service. And so let your women keep silent, not even to ask questions. And so they are to be as the tongue speaker that doesn't have an interpreter. Remember, we brought up that example last time where, you have this man who's able to speak in tongues, but yet there's no interpreter. He may have something worth saying, but yet he's to keep silent because there is no interpreter. And so he's not to speak out. And so we look at the reasons why this applies today. The first thing that he states there is that it's a shame. This is not, he doesn't state that it's cultural, that this is a practice of the time. He just states that it's a shame. And so, I don't believe this had a time limit on it, that this was a cultural thing, because, as we said last week, in Corinth you had a lot of different religions, a lot of different idols being worshipped. You had priestesses and things of that nature. And so to say that this was just cultural to Corinth, I believe, would be wrong, because I don't know that it would be that big of a deal in the culture there in Corinth. Also, the commands we have here are rooted in principles which go back to the very beginning. We look again at 1 Timothy chapter 2, 11 through 14, and he's talking there that for Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And so this is something that went back to Adam and to Eve. And then we see in Genesis 3 and verse 16 there that principle set forth there at the end of that verse, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And so we're not dealing with Paul's personal bias. We're dealing with a command from the Lord. And as we said last time, this is not a commentary. This is not a commentary on a woman's ability to contribute to the worship service. We believe that women are very able to do many different things. It's just simply the way God has set this up. And so we need to understand that, and we need to accept that. And so the question is, well, when and where are the women to keep silent? There in first part of verse 34, in the churches, for it's shameful for them to speak in church. And then again, the second part of verse 35, therefore it is shameful for women to speak in church. And so when you look at the definitions and you look at the context, it literally means in the church, literally in the assembly, or when the whole church has come together. And that's one thing why we wanted to read the context there as we begin, as we see what's going on. We're talking about the worship service. We're talking about how those services are to be conducted. And so, that's what we're talking about in this context here. So this principle applies whenever the whole church has come together in one place. And so we began last week looking at, what bearing this might have on different scenarios that we might be faced with. And so, some of these are very normal, something that we really are presented with every week. Some we may not be presented with that often, but I believe these are all things that are very, very relevant because they are being done in different places. Last time, we were talking about Bible classes when the whole church is present. And so, I believe the context, the things that we had just stated, and I believe most people in here would agree with me. And if you do not, you can definitely present your case. But when the whole church is present, I believe that women are to remain silent, just because of the principles that we stated previously. And I believe there's no grounds for a woman to speak out because she is to remain silent in the church. And so, Rodney brought up an instance when we were talking about it 2 or 3 weeks ago. Maybe you have a small congregation where, there's not enough people to split up into classes. And so you might have just 2 or 3 adults. I've been in those situations. I've preached and taught several times in a situation just like that. And so in that situation, you have the church together, whether it's 2, 3, 4, or 5, they're all together. You may be in the Bible class, but the church is assembled there. And so in that instance, I believe a woman is still to remain silent as well. Even though it is a Bible class situation, the church is there. We talked about how that, back earlier during COVID, when we were not splitting up for Bible classes, the entire congregation was in here. And so at that point as well, I believe women wouldn't need to remain silent. Any comments or anything along those lines? I wanted to say a little bit more about women speaking out when the whole church is not present. Like a situation right now, but as far as what we were dealing with exactly right there, David.
Shane, how would we handle it? We've had this happen some over the years, not with any ladies here that I'm aware of, but, I think with the other women, if you're in a setting like this, or full assembly. This is not full assembly, but it's it's close to it. But if a woman does start speaking or asking questions, you just let her go. You just let her ask a question.
Well, there's an opportunity to teach,
yeah.
And I guess to me would be along the same lines as maybe someone who begins teaching false doctrine in a class. You're going to have to deal with that and make sure everybody understands the truth in that scenario. And so, how to go about doing that exactly, I would just pray for wisdom on how to handle those situations. But, that's a hard thing. It could be handled differently in different ways, I guess. So.
And I think we certainly, and it would depend on the situation. I think who it is, and maybe the reason they're doing, maybe the reason if they just don't know, then I understand that, But we would have to be, aware and not have the wrong attitude about how we handle that situation, which would take, like I say, wisdom would certainly play in that.
Yeah, wisdom would play into that. We wouldn't want to harm our chances of teaching that person. And so, I'm not, I'm just speaking right off the top of my head here. You say a situation where, I see no visitors here, but maybe we had one that was in the service and that lady spoke out. Maybe instead of calling her out, because maybe everybody in here kind of understands, but, we talked to her about that later so that, we might handle that a little different. I don't know, like I said, I'm just speaking off the top of my head. Maybe that's a better way to handle that situation. Versus if we had a lot of visitors, we may need to do something a little more public just so that they understand. So, and I could be wrong on that, but like I said, that's just kind of talking off the top of my head there.
I would agree with you on that.
Okay. So as we move on there, what about Bible classes when the whole church is not present? And so I'm talking about this situation right here, where we have, now I agree the majority of the church is here. The majority of the church is in this room at this moment. But yet we have some classes being taught in the back. You have, women teaching children. You have men teaching young adults and things of that nature. Is it permissible for a woman to speak in here? And, in my opinion, if we limit it here and we say she can't speak in here, then, if we're all together, then, can she speak in the classroom in the back? And the way I presented last week is that the whole church is not together in this room because the church is divided up into different classes. And the way I see that is that at this point in this class, a woman would be permitted to ask a question in this setting. Now, I know some disagree with that. I was presented with something that I had not really ever thought of last time afterwards, and that is, and it's in a way you may think, well, this is getting off the subject, but it really has to deal with what we're talking about here. That if that, if we're dividing up and those count as the division, you're in another room, things like that, then would a lady or a man, either one, who would be maybe sitting back in the nursery in what we call the cry room, or maybe the audio-visual room, would they be in the assembly? And the question being, if they're not in the assembly, well, then they would not be permitted to partake of the Lord's Supper because they would not be coming together in the assembly. And so that's a very good question. And like I said, one that I really haven't ever thought of. And so, I've studied and I've talked with other people, and, there's not a real clear line there. And so, I was thinking of it this way: if you've got maybe we set up an area kind of to the side for a lady to feed her child, and we put up a curtain. Does that curtain then, is that piece of cloth, is she no longer in the assembly? Well, somebody said, well, yeah, she's still in this room, but so you've got a wall made out of fabric's okay, but then a wall made out of glass is not. And so there's really what I'm trying to say is I don't know where the line is drawn. And, to me, I think definitely someone in the back room watching the service on closed circuit television, I would say they are definitely not in the assembly. And so, and we never did this, but back when COVID was going more strongly, we had people watching back there, but yet they were coming closer in or in the back to partake of the Lord's Supper. And so, I know that in my mind that's definitely not in the assembly. These others, in my opinion, I would tend to err to the side of caution. And, if I'm sitting back there, I think I'm coming out to partake of the Lord's Supper. So, all of that being said, we're trying to determine what is the assembly and where is the assembly. And I think all of these are relevant questions. And so I would love to hear if somebody disagrees with that. Let me know. What do you think?
I'd just like to confirm what you said about our situation here right now. If this is the assembly, where we have separate Bible classes, then we have violated what Paul said, that there's only one student at a time. Because like you said, we have other teachers and other pastors that are speaking, we've been teaching different lessons. But the fact is, you have a multiplicity of people speaking at one time. So for those that, think that even in the Bible class assembly where we separate, that's still the assembly because we're in the same building, then we have to understand that we would have to discontinue that arrangement for it goes back that we're all, well, not all, but we have different speaking at once.
Yeah. For those who may not have been able to hear, what Brother Hall is stating is that, if the church is assembled and you've got all these other classes going on, then, we would have to stop other people speaking in the back because we would have multiple people speaking. And that goes back to, what we were talking about earlier, and the reason I read that context of what we were speaking about, and that goes to say that only one person at a time needs to be speaking. And so at this moment, we might have had earlier 2 or 3 prayers going on at one time. Definitely right now we've got 3 or 4 or 5 people speaking at the same time in this building. So I believe that's a good point when we're looking at our situation right here. Does anybody have anything they would like to say along those lines?
Shane, just along the line of what's been said, we are all assembled here today. There's been a time set, and, I won't belabor all that, because we know there's been a time set, the elders have set the time, it's been set. Does it change? Sometimes it does. When it changes, and we'll assemble a little bit at different times. So, this is a time for, we're all assembled in the building. This is a time for a Bible class or other Bible classes. Is all the church assembled in one building? Yes, we're all in one building, but we're in different locations in that building. So, I think, to me, in my simple thinking, it's the time that's set for these things, to me. I mean, we'll have a class, and then then we'll always assemble together. Everybody that's in these other buildings, everybody's in these other rooms, they'll be in here. So that's the assembly. We're all assembled in one place. I think that, to me, that's the way I look at it. I think, based on what I understand of the scripture, that I think it bear that out. So I think it has, to me, it's the way we've allotted this time for what time is set up. If we're going to have one large assembly, there wouldn't be any Bible class. And we do that sometimes.
Yeah, the time has something to do with it too, but the language in these passages, I think, who is there also has something. And the reason I say that is, the next one I was going to discuss, kind of bleeding over into this, is I've been to several congregations, or I say several, 2 or 3, where they would have the assembly worship, everything's done, they have the closing prayer, and then they have the announcements, and you have everybody kind of speaking up, men and women there. And I've been in congregations, at least 2, if not more, where they have done that. So, the assembly time is over, and that's the way they see it. The assembly time is over, but yet the church is still there. And so I take issue with that because, nothing, the makeup of who is assembled has not changed. Now, if you had half the congregation go out and the other half or whatever stay, people kind of coming and going, whatever, then the makeup has changed. But, nobody leaves and then women start speaking. I take issue with that. Anybody? Yeah, you're still assembled.
Yeah, I would agree with that right
But, the reason that they do it is because I think kind of what you're saying is the time, the assembly, the purpose is finished. We've concluded our assembly. But so now anybody can speak.
I don't know if I thought of that circumstance, but I can see that. I think it all should be assembled. That could we, we're leaving, if it's over with and we're all still in here, everybody's still in here, can we talk? Can women talk? Can we all talk then? Even though we still be in here, but the assembly would be, I guess it would be over. And I think most people would understand that it would be over. If you wait till you get outside, you wait till you get in the car for women to speak.
Well, yeah, but
I agree with, all that you said, but during COVID, I think I've changed, I don't know if it's changed, I think it helped me go back, like we all had to do, and think through the assembly. And several of us were discussing the one brother, close friend of mine, he was maintaining that if the cry room represented being in the assembly, then you could be at home, you see, because you just kind of, like you were, you're just backing out, You go, okay, in the back room. Now, what about if you're out in the parking lot? What if you see, you just,
Yeah.
so, but I think to me, what I think the language of the Bible is what will determine it. Like, upon the first day of the week when the disciples came together. Okay, so now, home is ruled out because there's no coming together there.
Mm-hmm.
You might be wired up, but you hadn't come together. We know that's a physical coming together. So, but it doesn't say in the same room. See, this is what it, now I thought it, what I mean is, I was always concerned about the cry room through the years. I just wish people would, during the Lord's Supper, step in here.
Yeah.
But I guess now where I landed, even the people in the room wired in, that but has come together.
Yeah.
I mean, came here, is
Yeah.
what I'm saying. And then see, what I mean is, I think they fit all the criteria of we're all doing it they're not going ahead and taking it before others, that we're all in the same place.
Yeah.
Not the same, what I mean is, if during the days of Jesus, if it was 5,000 out here at Jerusalem Church, well, 5,000 can't get in this building. See, we couldn't get 5,000 in here if we just stacked on top of each other. See, so now we out here, and I would argue we are all come together. That's what the language says. See, it don't say in the same room, but it does say when the whole church be come together into one place. When you come together as a church, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper. So the question is, did the people in that room, in the cry room, come together to break bread as a church with us? Are we all, and you see so that's kind of my position. Some may disagree with that, but that's where I landed. COVID forced me to rethink that.
Yeah, and I don't, I'll be glad to discuss this with anybody. And my thinking's still kind of, I hate to say morphing, but I'm trying to solidify.
I'm with you.
And so Philip had his hand up first. So Philip, you can go ahead and then we'll get to Jeremy.
I agree with Rodney. I mean, in talking about the cry room, and we've gone to great lengths as a church to include those people. Here we have glass. We could have had a solid wall. We've had sound system installed inside of there, so that person can feel that they are part of the assembly. We didn't have to do that. I mean, it could have been a room, and like you say, if the cry room was just a classroom back there, then I would say no, they're not part of the assembly. But since they have that ability to see what's going on, to hear what's going on, I consider them part of the assembly.
Okay.
If the cry room was right here, that's what I did. I put the cry room right here.
Yeah.
Would they be, and they closed in, piece of glass. Are they with us? Are they with us or are they not? And I said, yeah, they with us. But what makes them with us? They in another room. See, if the cry room was where you were, not sitting there, but it was actually right here. And then you teaching right there. And we just all, now, are they with us? Have they come together into one place to break bread? Into one place to break bread? And I say yes. That's where I've landed. But again,
Okay. Jeremy?
just explain it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean that for the same reason, and because the language allows for that. We come together into one place. Whether you're in the cry room, you're here for the same purpose. You're partaking of it at the same time. You can hear what's going on, as far as I know. And you're partaking of the Lord's Supper at the same time that we are. We're together for that reason. If not, if that doesn't follow, then what we did in the parking lot would be a violation. Or we were all in one place. We were in the parking lot. We were separated in vehicles. Do we all have to be in the same car?
Or can we be separated by the walls, per se, of our vehicles, our doors, or the metal of our vehicle? It's the same separation. If that's not the same, then I don't know what's.
But when we use that same reasoning to women speaking out, how does that, to the women's, we're talking, the whole reason we're here is can women speak here and speak back there?
No, because they're back there to conduct a different class. It's not the same class. It's a totally separate, environment where they're at. And some of them are teaching people that aren't even Christian, they're just kids, they're kids. So that's how I reconcile it in my mind. In my mind, it's clear. I'm not saying I'm any better, but I'm just saying in my mind, it's clear that the purpose, those classes are being conducted, like Brother Hall said, and I made this point in passing last week. If what we're doing in here and having these, if it's all one assembly, because someone made that comment, if we're all in one assembly now and we're broken up in classes, we're in big trouble. Because we got people talking all over the place, saying different things, conducting their classrooms differently and all kinds of stuff. But that's just where I land on it.
Okay. I have a couple of more things I want to go before we have to close, or go over before we have to close up. Does anybody have any quick comments along those lines? I know there's some differing opinions here, and we can continue to discuss this privately or however the elders see fit. But a lot of good questions, a lot of good points. And I mean, stuff like this is what keeps us sharp, trying to discuss and to figure these things out. The next scenario, or actually situation, it's not hypothetical at all, but I believe Lee and Emily visited with a congregation a while back where, they started the worship service, everyone, they had the prayer, they had singing, and at some point before the sermon, the congregation had a memory verse that they were memorizing. And so I believe this one happened to be the 23rd Psalm. And so at some point, all the congregation said that memory verse together. This was not a song. This was just a memory verse, everyone speaking the verse. So you had men, women, children, everyone, from what I understand, it kind of sounded like a chant, doing this in the assembly worship. Is there anything wrong with that? And there again, we probably don't have time to hash it out completely, but I'm just speaking with different people. I'm going to kind of give you a sum of what some in here have said. There again, we go back to the scriptures and we try to base whatever we do upon the scriptures. And I don't know of anywhere in the scriptures where you have an example of a congregation repeating scripture together. We don't have an example of that. We have people singing. We're told we're commanded to sing, but you have people reading. But you go back to the previous verses there, 26 and through 29. Those in chapter 14, and you have where one person at a time should be speaking. And so I really had I kind of take issues with that because there again we don't have examples. We have multiple people speaking at one time. At some point, maybe could this get out of order where people are, it could be there. I mean, I just can't go along with it. So quickly, does anybody have anything that they would like to add to that?
That just gets back to orderly.
Yeah.
Something in order.
And I mean, I guess technically, if you practice enough, maybe it did. But when you've got a different passage each week, I don't know. You have a harder time keeping that in order. But some of these other things, I believe, are strong arguments as well. Anyone else? Have you?
It seems to me, not that I don't read much at all, but, what happens is these congregations do that. Nobody ever asks a question. Nobody ever teaches on like yourself and others. We don't bring that up, so and make an assumption it must be okay. And that, I think that can get us off, but I think probably has. Got some of, we get used to doing this, nobody questions why, or is it wrong, or is it right, or is it a little wrong, or is it a little right? I mean, it sounds good,
Yeah.
you know, but
Okay.
if we
Any,
don't talk about it and teach about it, you know, we're not gonna know really.
okay. Anything else there?
I've been in churches where they do things I thought were wrong. I don't wait to come back here and ask about it. I ask about it there where it is. We talk about it there where I think it's wrong. Try to work it out.
You know, to begin with, when I was presented with that, you know, I'm like, you know, it took me a little bit to work it through my mind. I'll be honest with you. It just, you know, it didn't, you know, I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And so when Emily came and asked me about it, you know, it took me a little bit to kind of work that one through. All right, the last one here, and you know, I'm sure that there may be, like I said, a lot of things people would like to discuss, and I'll be more than happy to discuss this with you. But it's one to me that I've kind of struggled with, I mean, honestly, since I was little, and that is a lady. And, you know, suppose at the end of our assembly services this morning, the invitation, she comes down and she wants to be baptized. And then the preacher has her stand up to address the congregation confessing her faith. You've got a lady addressing the assembly. Is that right or is that wrong? You know, we look at, you know, confession of faith and where we're told to confess faith. And, you know, personally, I see no commandment where that has to be public. You say, well, she's commanded to confess her faith. Well, I believe women are commanded to pray. So does that give them the authority to pray publicly in the assembly worship? I believe a woman's commanded to teach. She's commanded to teach the younger women. So could she present a lesson to the congregation specifically addressing the younger women? She's commanded to, I believe, to refute false doctrine whenever she's confronted with it. So could she stand up in assembly where false doctrine has just been, you know, maybe we've got a guest speaker that teaches something, you know, could the lady stand up and do that? You know, she's commanded to do a lot of things. But the one thing that she's commanded not to do is to speak in the assembly. And so, you know, a confession of faith, you know, could that be to the preacher there? Could that be back here in the room to 4 or 5 people? Does that have to be addressing the congregation when, you know, she's specifically told not to speak out in the congregation? And so, you know, like I said, that's one that I've struggled with for a long time, because I always thought, you know, even as a child, I thought that was odd, that a woman would be asked, encouraged to address the congregation in a manner like that. And, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of discussion.
And that's not even binding on the man. Like, I don't have to, if a person's sitting here and they want to obey the gospel, that'd be an invitation. They don't have to come up and say it right in front of everybody.
Yeah.
They could wait till it's over and say, you know, say to someone out there in the foyer, and say, I want to obey the gospel. Like, there's no, like, that's a tradition of ours in churches, you know, churches of Christ, and denominational churches do the same thing, where they, you know, everybody expects the person, when the invitation is given, they expect them to walk up front. Well, that's not, no one has to do that necessarily. It's convenient. And it's easier for the man to do it because he can.
Yeah, and we take that a step further, you know, confess your faults to one another and pray for one another. You know, we have no issues with a man getting up here and confessing his sin. Well, so a woman's commanded the same to do that. You know, could she get up and address the congregation and confess her sin? And I believe if she's able to confess her faith, she's able to confess her sin.
If you could go an extra 5, we took a lot of your time.
So, I mean, Rodney's saying if we go an extra 5 minutes or so, does anybody have anything? I mean, if you want to say something, go ahead and say it, and we'll hash it out just a little bit if the elders are. We've already gone over 5. They've given me my 5, Rodney. But, you know, just think about these things. And I encourage you, go home and talk about it over lunch. Come back to me. Tell me. Waylay Rodney with it next time. But, you know, all of these things, we need to be talking about them. And you know, I've grown more closer to people I respect when I present these questions to people, and we have an opportunity to hash some of these things out. You know, Brother Hall helped me with some of these, and we don't agree on all of it. But he helped me. Dub, really quick, and then we got to close up.
If you're in a church somewhere, you don't know anything about it, whatever, you're doing something that you see wrong, take care of it right there.
Yeah.
Don't wait till you get somewhere else.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's attention and participation.